joining us for this chat, Why the World Needs Open Source Agile. My name is David Parker, the Executive Director of the OpenAgile Institute, and I'm with Mishkin Berteig, co-founder of Berteig Consulting. Thanks for joining me, Mishkin.
Thanks, David, and glad to be here.
The burning question on my mind is, why does the world need open source Agile? So first off, could you explain to us about open source? Many people have heard of Linux or Wikipedia. Give us a little bit of an insight onto what open source is.
Yeah, so the basic concept with open source is the idea that information and usable systems and so forth should be available to people in a way that allows for more freedom than if they're proprietary. So whether we're talking about software or encyclopedias, actually the Wikipedia example is fantastic. The idea is that it's out there, open for anyone, but not just to use it as an encyclopedia, but actually to contribute back into it. So for example, if I'm an expert about a topic, I can go onto the Wikipedia website and sign up and start contributing information about my expertise. And it becomes part of this free system that almost anyone can use.
So let's go to the other concept, Agile, and you could give us an insight on who uses Agile now and maybe where it's going.
Sure. So historically, Agile methods come from the software environment, and the basic concept is really simple. Teams work together, they work in short cycles, and every cycle they try and deliver something of value. At the end of the cycle, they get feedback on what they've delivered from whether it's users or stakeholders or whoever, customers, and they also look at how they did their work and then they adapt. So the next cycle, which again anywhere from 1 to 4 weeks in duration in the software environment, and they just keep going through this process over and over again. So it's a system that allows them to adapt to change and learn. It's also being used, though, in a lot of other places besides just software development. So management teams in large organizations, sales teams, there's, as you well know, there's some volunteer organizations and nonprofits that are adopting Agile for managing their affairs. It's also being used in more traditional engineering type project management environments now. So it's really gone beyond just the software thing.
How do you start to bring these two concepts together?
Well, I think it's very important to understand that both of them are about systems that allow for adapting and learning. They do it in slightly different ways. And they also have some interesting background that is very compatible. So the idea of collaboration, sharing, transparency, these are things that are very much a part of both approaches.
But wouldn't you already think that Agile is already open source in a way?
There are some aspects which are similar, but for example, there are some Agile methodologies that are very proprietary, so they are owned by organizations. There's trademarks and patents and copyrights associated with these things. They're openly learnable, you can learn about them, but the process of contributing back into them is very restricted.
So then, on the other hand, what would be some of the advantages of having an open source Agile method?
So one thing that I find in my experience as an Agile practitioner and as a consultant to many organizations is that when you read about an Agile method, it's described in a very fixed way. But when it's put into practice, in fact, there's all sorts of things that are learned in an organization or in a team, but those things never get brought back into the original method. So an open source Agile method then would have some way of allowing people to take whatever is the best current learning about how to do Agile, practice it, but then feed back into the community so that people in the community could actually benefit from the learning that goes on in these various teams and organizations around the world.
So you've been involved in this process of developing an open source Agile method.
Mm-hmm.
What's the best way for people to get involved?
Well, there's a few things. First of all, storytelling. If you have a story about how you've taken an existing Agile method and applied it in unusual circumstances or adapted it and still gotten good results. Or if you have a story about how you've tried to apply an Agile method and it hasn't worked out for you, those stories are very important to share. And that's probably one of the basic, most important things. So there's the storytelling, but there's also, taking the stories and abstracting the, what are the rules, what are the concepts, what are the things that we've learned from those stories, and being able to describe them in a way that other people can then use them. So the process of trying out Agile methods, the process of applying them, and of course, with OpenAgile in particular, it's designed to be open source Agile, and so getting involved with OpenAgile is highly recommended.
I recommend it too. So why should someone who's out there practicing any of the Agile methodologies out there, why should they get on board and support building a new method that's open source rather than getting very involved in supporting their existing method?
There's a lack of integrity and coherence. So for example, and not to pick on Scrum, but the way that Scrum operates is that it's almost become dogmatic. There's a certain form, and in terms of the community, there's very little learning about how to change Scrum itself. The Scrum Alliance, which manages the certification programs, doesn't use Scrum to develop Scrum itself. So Scrum is static. And that's true, actually, of most of the Agile methods. They become relatively static. Not completely, but given how many people are using them, it would be lovely if everyone who's actually trying these things out could contribute into an open source environment, again, so that everyone can get the benefit of that. And the way to do that, of course, is to use an Agile approach to build an Agile method.
So can you sum it up for us and tell us, given what we've talked about, why does the world need open source Agile?
I think the main purpose of it is to help everyone benefit from the best learning that's out there. And of course, there is sharing going on, news groups and so forth, but it's not structured. There's no coherence to it. And sometimes that's good. Early days of Agile, of course, there was few people using it, but I think now there's a real opportunity to have a coherent framework that people can look at and say, this is Agile, and this is how it's going to help us, regardless of whether you're doing software or volunteer organization or a management team. So hopefully then the world, going through as much change as it is, can use this open source Agile approach freely, openly, contribute back into it to help make the world a better place. No small task, but nevertheless.
Thank you. And thank you for joining us and giving us your insights. I hope the community out there enjoys and gives us their feedback. If you have insights that you'd like to share about practicing Agile methods out in the rest of the world, we would welcome your feedback and insights on stories.openagile.org, or send me an email at david.changemaker@gmail.com.